Some lost wanderers take shelter in a cabin in the middle of woods, which has mysteriously been kept in a livable condition. As days go on, with the food supplies running thin, a heavy rainfall leads to a flood, trapping the group within the cabin, leaving them to die due to starvation. As the group experiences the excruciating pain of starvation, strange events start to occur, making the group question their own sanity. Hi folks, I'm R, your narrator. This game, like many others, has been suggested to me, so make sure to suggest your video games to me on Twitter, which I could cover in the next videos. This video will contain spoilers. With that said, let's begin. The game starts with four hikers, Gregor, Anatoly, Maria and Karen, appreciating the cabin they found on their way after a brutal walk in Tatras Mountains wooded area bordering the countries of Poland and Slovakia. The main character, just like the other four hikers, seems to be on the same boat as them, just arriving to the cabin with them, who alongside each other separate the workload to survive the harsh conditions. Anatoly and Maria decide to go out and gather food supplies, while Gregor plans to gather firewood for the fireplace. Despite finding an isolated cabin in the middle of the mountains, it seems to be in a good livable condition, as if somebody has been maintaining it. Maria also complains about dust, which is a sign of people having been present there before for quite a while, as dust is the collection of dead skin cells in a closed-off place. This leaves Karen and the protagonist alone, who have some small talk, with the protagonist taking the role as a chef using the emergency supplies. The protagonist looks around the kitchen and finds some ingredients who mysteriously talk, having cute and energetic personalities. The ingredients introduce themselves as chumpets, a name they have given themselves as a group. There are 5 of them, being the cabbage, onion, raspberry, bread, and potato. The chumpets inform the protagonist that he can get secret recipes from them and talk with them instead of the boring humans, indicating that the protagonist might suffer from isolation, social anxiety, or antisocial behavior, if the chumpets are a figment of his own imagination. The first recipe being provided to the protagonist is specifically mentioned to be meat-free, as if the protagonist avoids meat or doesn't like it. The conversation comes to an abrupt end when the cabbage shuts the drawer, with the protagonist questioning his own mental health, wondering if what he just witnessed was real or not, maybe the lack of food and hunger starting to affect his mental state. The protagonist then collects all the emergency supplies the hikers already had with them and starts cooking a meal with whatever he can. Soon Maria, Anatoly, and Gregor arrive, bringing some more supplies which could maintain them for a day or two. Karen joins the bunch and explains she killed so many spiders while cleaning the place, which Maria is thankful for, as she's scared of them and wouldn't want to sleep on the couch as there were a lot of spiders. Gregor reassures her and explains that he can sleep anywhere, displaying what a strong man he is. Anatoly's nerdy stature, yet broad knowledge about survival, puts him at a center point of being the brain of the group. Gregor's large and masculine nature makes him stereotypically the strongest of all, both physically and mentally, hence why he chose to collect heavy firewood and showed indifference sleeping anywhere, even on a rocking chair. With Maria being a gentle lady with vulnerabilities such as allergies, and finally Karen having more of a strong mindset, displayed through her sarcastic, not giving a damn attitude. Sitting on a table and starting to eat the vegetable stew, Karen dismisses it as just a generic vegetable stew despite the others praising it, displaying how mean Karen is. Gregor suggests having some meat next time, to which Maria displays disgust, showing she might be vegetarian or not too fussed about meat. After a good sleep, the next day begins with Gregor making a remark on how warm and cozy it was that he didn't even need a blanket. Soon everyone joins in, with Maria clearly explaining she's not into meat, with Gregor being the exact opposite, displaying his craving for flesh. Anatoly shares similar mindset with Maria, being seemingly more pragmatic, that he's got a wide knowledge about plants which could satiate them and be sufficient. On the other hand, Karen sides more with Gregor, displaying her craving for meat, wanting to go fishing. The group decides to head out and look for supplies while they leave the protagonist in the cabin, entrusting him with their stuff, while Karen warns him not to steal and leave with their belongings. This depicts that the four hikers might know each other better than the protagonist, with the protagonist just recently being acquainted with them. As the protagonist is left all alone, it provides him with the perfect time to get to know his seemingly imaginary trumpets better and possibly get a new recipe. The cabbage is only available this time, who explains the others are in the locked, creepy basement. After providing him with a recipe of Lebanese-style tabbouleh, one of my personal favorite salads, she quickly leaves when the human companions arrive. They explain how Gregor was scared encountering a marmot earlier, despite his large stature, stereotypically making one believe he shouldn't be afraid of anything, which he looks quite ashamed of, stopping himself before explaining why he's scared of them. After making cabbage rolls, this time Karen actually praising the protagonist's cooking skills, they all go to bed with day number 2 commencing. Gregor wakes up early, waking everyone else up as well, who act quite groggy and displeased by Gregor. He informs everyone that it's likely to rain and possibly even get flooded, so they better get a move on and gather supplies before it's too late. They all agree, except for Karen, who's quite reluctant. The group leaves once more, leaving the protagonist all on his own for some reason, as if he has the ownership of the cabin. The protagonist talks to his imaginary friends, the Chumpets, who talk in riddles about cooking meals that the protagonist truly enjoys and how the guests are monsters, referring to the human companions as if the protagonist has been in this cabin before. After some time, Maria comes to the cabin earlier this time, getting a chance to speak with the protagonist one-on-one. She expresses her concerns for the supplies, indicating that they're running short and she and Anatoly couldn't find enough this time. She reasons with the protagonist to use less ingredients this time and cook simpler meals in order to manage their inventory better, as if the protagonist intentionally wants to run out of supplies quicker. This time, the protagonist prepares bread and some homemade jam, just enough to prevent the people from starving, and subsequently, they all go to bed. The protagonist then has a horrifying nightmare of drowning with a monstrous entity pulling him under. At night, hearing a loud thunder, everyone wakes up with the entry door opening and shutting forcefully. As the group inspects the outside, they observe that they are surrounded by floodwater, luckily being on high grounds not flooding the cabin. However, this leaves them trapped and stranded within the cabin, preventing them from going out and gathering supplies. Maria then shocks everyone by explaining she has studied a book about precipitation, and based on her studies, she gives it a mere 27% chance of the water clearing up, meaning that they are at least trapped within the cabin for a day or two. They leave the protagonist in charge of managing the food supplies and cooking while passing around some bread and jam. As the protagonist takes the remainder bread and jam to the group, they become frustrated with how little is left and quickly start worrying. Maria, despite showing concern, still expresses her gratitude, explaining that despite the food being little, it's more than they ever had when they left Ukraine, which could mean that the group is from Ukraine who wanted to travel to another country but took refuge in the cabin as possibly they lost their way or wanted to take shelter temporarily. After some tough time accepting a difficult reality they're about to face, Karen has some intimate conversation with the protagonist, revealing that she has a crush on him. Subsequently, they all go to bed, with the next day beginning. Everyone gathers with the floodwater still keeping them stranded, with Anatoly speaking facts that they have to spend the day without food, which upsets everyone, who each go to a different room. The protagonist approaches Karen in the kitchen, who explains she's keeping up a tough-skinned, mean act so she wouldn't be considered soft, as if she had a tough past with difficult people. After a few hours, with everyone expressing how hungry they are, they decide to head to bed. A strange dream overwhelms the protagonist yet again, where he is ordering a boy in the kitchen to lie on a tray, seemingly to cook and eat him. The boy is angered and calls him names, to which the protagonist lies on the tray himself to demonstrate how the boy could do it. The boy becomes courageous and pushes the protagonist into the oven, which slowly starts to cook him, while the boy stares at him while he's doing the same. In a way, it shows early signs of what is to happen and what to expect. As the clock is ticking, everyone becoming wolves, which in return makes the protagonist think he should be prepared in any case scenario. The next day begins, with the rain still pouring as heavily as before, with the floodwater rising higher. With one slice of bread left and the group struggling to sleep due to the loud thunder and their empty stomachs, they start to lose their optimism and think about what they should expect. At the table, they take their share from one slice of bread that's left and go to sleep being extremely hungry. In the next day, the rain is just as heavy as before, with the floodwater rising even higher. Anatoly mentions with fake optimism that rain should stop after a few days, with Maria correcting him, saying that rain in the specific area could go on for months. Karen, feeling the grim sense of doom and despair creeping into her, asks for some reassurance, even if it's fabricated. After the group disperses, the protagonist approaches Maria, who strengthened their relationship, with Maria explaining about why they left Ukraine. The group, excluding the protagonist, left the harsh conditions of Ukraine in the story's lore, where they were starving, with parents giving their children to orphanages to stop them from dying due to hunger. This could potentially mean that the time is 1932 to 1933, during the Soviet Ukraine's Great Famine called Holodomor, or maybe some other time when there was Great Famine. That's when they decided to escape Ukraine, stealing some supplies, ending up in the cabin, which Maria describes as something better. That explains why Karen is so mean and tough-skinned, as she seemingly had to survive the brutal conditions of her past life. The protagonist then decides to check on the trumpets, with the quiet, ever mysterious and serious potato only being present, who says that the others will be back soon. The potato, unlike the other trumpets, is brutally honest and not very friendly. He starts breaking down the scenario and what the protagonist should expect now. He explains that the protagonist will face starvation and the factors that are involved. The factors are age, height, weight, and degree of activity or inactivity, all having an impact on how soon someone starves to death. The potato gives a precise equation even, explaining how long the protagonist would survive based on how many calories he needs a day. He continues to almost accurately calculate each member of the group calorie intake requirement, as if it's something he has studied before. It all being inside the protagonist's head, it seems as if he's gone through this dilemma before. After some discussion, they decide the best option is for Maria to swim through the floodwaters and find help for food, as she is good at swimming. Everyone except Karen is upset that Maria has to go, trying to reason to go instead, but Maria is steadfast in her decision and leaves. In an emotional and sad farewell, Maria promises everyone that she will keep everyone alive and that she will come back. After some time, sun starts to set, with the rest of the group heading to bed to maybe ease the pain of hunger. Another strange dream, similar to the previous one, shows how the protagonist is trying to put someone in the oven, when instead he gets pushed into it, starting to burn. But somehow, he gains supernatural powers, getting out of the oven and ripping its door open, chasing after the culprit who threw him into the oven. As his anger allows him to have supernatural powers, ripping the trees from their roots, the protagonist falls through a chasm into the depth of earth, starting to have his eyes burned, realizing he's in hell, when all of a sudden he awakens in cold sweat. This implies as if he feels guilty about something he cannot shake off. The next day begins with the rain still pouring. They discuss about Maria with teary eyes and how she would be okay, knowing full well that she's quite likely dead. After some time, they all go back to bed, with the protagonist having a bizarre dream about desecrating a corpse, seemingly having these weird thoughts after experiencing starvation. Next day, with the rain still pouring, the protagonist meets with Karen in the kitchen and starts cooking with a large piece of meat, as if he's in a good dream. Karen, in surprise, interrogates him, but he ignores her queries. Both Grigor and Anatoly follow the smell and look in shock, looking at him with worried eyes and confused faces, yet staring at the meat and salivating, not wanting to even know. As the meat cooks and the protagonist takes it out of the oven, he cuts it into pieces, with the group taking them greedily without getting any answers or even asking any more. After they fully devour their pieces, Anatoly runs to the bathroom and pukes, coming back and feeling guilty, as if he's done something wrong. He takes some more, looking guilty, turning his back to the group and continuing to eat like a starving stray animal. The rest also eat some more, with the protagonist explaining he had some meat before, having it stored in a secured, locked place in order to ration it. The group doesn't ask any more questions, with Karen leaving the group. In the bathroom, the protagonist speaks with Anatoly, who seems to have some sort of idea where the meat came from, who begs the protagonist not to tell him where it came from, not wanting his conscience to get involved. Meeting up with Grigor in his room, he seems pleased with the meat, seemingly not having a clue where the meat came from. In the room, the protagonist finds an article dated 1862 about the butcher of Zakopane, a town in Poland. It entails how the body of a child was discovered being stuffed inside a barrel of potatoes, correlating with the other deaths of the butcher of Zakopane, with the victims having multiple stab wounds. Zakopane is located in southern Poland, close to Tatras Mountains, close to where the cabin is located in, which could mean the killer is somehow related to the cabin. When night begins, all agree to ration the food, going to bed early, sleeping better this time. The protagonist yet again has another dream, having dinner with a blacksmith who's not touching his food, who ends up poking the protagonist's eye out, making him wake up in cold sweat again. Next day, Grigor shows the protagonist the floodwater, which has slightly receded, showing concern for Maria, who's not back yet. Anatoly joins soon later with Karen, explaining that he hears Maria every night at 2 a.m. with gurgling noises as if she's drowning. Grigor also mentions that he hears her whispering, with Karen denying experiencing anything paranormal as such. Soon, Karen explains that she sometimes hears her voice from the radio, but dismisses it as just a broadcast, with her face turning into a wide-eyed monster momentarily. Anatoly's face also transforms into a ghoul, similarly asking for more piece of meat, continuing in riddles that this would get them a step closer to Maria. Something she would have wanted, wanting them to survive and not starve. On the table, with the protagonist getting some more of his secretly stashed meat, cooking it in boiling water without any seasoning, Anatoly starts to apologize to everyone, explaining that he doesn't know what is happening to him, remembering Maria all of the sudden and starting to weep. It all seems so surreal, with Anatoly's being guilty, mentioning Maria all of the time while eating, hinting that Maria might have died, with the protagonist chopping her up to serve her flesh to the group and himself, with the demonic faces of Karen and Anatoly creating a sense of being reduced into more primitive states, just wanting to survive. Karen then soon interrogates the protagonist about the meat and how much is left, to which he explains that most of it is spoiled now and inedible, which severely angers Karen. This makes the protagonist to order Anatoly to go outside tomorrow and look for Maria, which makes him nervous. They unanimously make the decision for Anatoly, who seems very reluctant, which makes him say that he needs to sleep on it. As they try to sleep, the protagonist sees one of the trumpets, the Onion, approaching him after hearing some whispers from Maria. The Onion tries to plead with the protagonist to stop Anatoly from leaving the cabin, who would most likely break under the pressure. The Onion then quietly mumbles a cryptic line that the protagonist doesn't want another one stuck in the hallways, tapping on the windows and crying through the radio, which explains where all the strange noises come from. This mysterious message explains that Maria is possibly dead and the protagonist seemingly had a hand in it, whose soul is roaming the halls of the cabin, seemingly alongside some others before her, people that the protagonist was acquainted with, whom he killed and ate, who don't leave his side, hunting him. The next day begins with Karen severely pressuring Anatoly to leave. Anatoly mentions how he heard the whispers of Maria last night telling him to go out, which spooked them to the point of breaking down into tears. Karen explains she's running out of patience while salivating, looking at Anatoly, with the glint of a knife stashed under her dress being observable, a knife that the protagonist gave her earlier, which worries the protagonist that she might use it against them. As the group disperses, Karen shares a secret with the protagonist that she isn't giving Anatoly a choice and that she wants him to leave for whatever twisted plan she has for him, suggestive of her wanting him to suffer a similar fate to Maria, with his flesh ending up on their table. As Karen pressures Anatoly in a group meeting, Anatoly breaks under pressure and promises he'll be back with help and food, which makes Gregor, the soft giant, to tear up and express how much he would miss Anatoly and that he would go instead of him. As Anatoly leaves, Karen with an evil and sinister expression goes back to bed, waiting patiently for something. Gregor, on the other hand, keeps crying, feeling guilty that he didn't tell Anatoly the truth about something. As everyone's sleeping, Brett comes to the protagonist and mentions that he should protect Gregor, as him, despite being large in size and strong, he's not good at confrontations. The Brett warns the protagonist of Karen, who is clearly stashing a knife and is ready to use it. As the next day begins, the protagonist finds some more meat magically, clearly being from Anatoly's corpse. But the question is, how does he receive the meat as they head out swimming in the vast floodwater? Karen runs to the kitchen and devours the meat, acting instinctually, dismissing the thought of rationing, wanting more and more. Gregor, on the other hand, comes to the kitchen due to hunger, looking at the meat with tears, shocked that it's already done. Gregor succumbs to hunger and takes a bite while being conflicted and exploding in tears. The protagonist tucks in his head that they always succumb to hunger, as if it's not the first time he's experiencing this. As Gregor leaves and curls up on the couch, Karen excitedly goes to the protagonist, praising his work and how he got so good at it, reading a book about necropsy, clearly referring to butchering and serving up human flesh. She mentions how she overcame the first nights of nightmare, saying it was actually worth it, showing how psychopathic she is. Continuing their conversation, Karen discusses their next victim, being Gregor, who doesn't know how to swim, which makes her question in a confirmational manner if their buddies always come back. This explains that the bodies of Anatoly and Maria were drifted back to the shore next to the cabin, which the protagonist dragged back to the cabin and cooked, something that he has been doing for a long time with many people before, hence why there are never-ending whispers and noises in the cabin. However, it's a little strange that their bodies always magically appear at the shore, so maybe leaving the cabin is an analogy to the guests giving up their bodies for the butcher or the protagonist to chop up and serve. This is a known fact that everyone knew since Maria disappeared, but something nobody wanted to clearly discuss. Karen crosses the line and even suggests taking a shortcut and spiking Gregor's drink with strong anesthetics, letting her do the work on him, chopping him up while he's asleep. She even has the audacity to mention that it's for the best, as he wouldn't feel any pain. They call Gregor and spike a drink, giving it to him, as he explains how he met Anatoly when they were teenagers. Feeling guilty and crying, he starts to pass out, with Karen taking him to the couch. Karen asks the protagonist not to get involved, even if he hears Gregor screams, displaying how she was lying about Gregor not feeling pain. It seems as if she wants to cut a small piece while keeping him alive and restrained, so that they have a long supply of meat before Gregor dies and his flesh spoils. As the next day begins, the protagonist wakes up witnessing Karen staring at him intently, being in the same bedroom, with Karen telling him that she made breakfast. As suspected, the protagonist observes Gregor dismembered, missing his legs and an arm, being preserved for his meat. Even for an inhumane butcher like the protagonist, he believes it's gone too far, with Karen being a complete psychopath, being completely selfish and only seeing herself. Previously calling Maria and Anatoly nerds for being smart and reading, while calling Gregor stupid for not doing that, showing complete disrespect and lack of sympathy even though she's consuming his flesh. Therefore, when she said that her mean persona is just an act, she in fact was mean and brutal, being who she truly is. Gregor begs the protagonist to end his life quickly when it comes to it, not letting Karen to torture him any longer. Gregor continues to explain to the protagonist why he's afraid of mermaids, talking about when he was young, his friend was brutally murdered by a boar, thinking the baby mermaids they encountered were the boar's children. As Gregor carried his friend's mangled corpse to his parents' house, his mother opens the door, letting out a shriek that he cannot forget till now. That's why he decided to be stronger, at least physically, working out to build muscles, to hide the fact how weak he truly is. As he's completely broken, still displaying and expressing his will to help, he takes his last breath, dying in a sad and brutal manner, a death he did not deserve. Karen rushes in, being angry, noticing that Gregor died, complaining that they could have kept him alive for a week to have a steady supply of meat, showing what a savage and callous person she truly is. The protagonist then goes to the kitchen with one of the trumpets, the cabbage appearing. She explains that Karen knows where the key to the basement is, a place where he can start exploring. Visiting Karen, he observes her carving a wooden knife with another knife which used to belong to the protagonist. Karen shows a sudden change in behavior, being rude and threatening, displaying her true, cruel nature. Going down to the basement, Karen sneaks up to the protagonist when the protagonist tells her about the trumpets, which makes Karen look at the protagonist with contempt, believing he's lost his mind. After opening the basement door, that's when he realizes that Karen's palate for human flesh has developed beyond anything he would have ever imagined when she lunges at him with a knife to kill him and subsequently eat him. The protagonist, being somehow prepared and expecting this moment, evades Karen's attack and swiftly takes the knife from her and stabs her, which makes her retreat further into the depth of the pitch-black basement. In there, the protagonist starts to gag, unable to breathe due to the rotting corpses of lost wanderers he had lured into the cabin and slaughtered, storing their dead bodies in the basement, including the remains of Gregor, Maria, and Anatoly. Their spirits appear before him, pressuring him to turn the light on and face the horrendous actions he has committed, to what a monster he truly is, a monster that avoids confronting his actions, a monster that doesn't even want to look at himself in the mirror. Soon enough, the spirit of Karen joins in, encouraging him to turn on the light as well, indicating she passed away when the story comes to an end. After the credit roll, the story goes back to the very beginning, where it's revealed that the companions were in fact lost wanderers who stumbled upon the protagonist's cabin. He seems to have been desecrating the corpses of the previous wanderers when he hears the guests entering the cabin. He goes up to the new arrival, saying to himself that he will eat well from now on, referring to the guests as food. The protagonist asks a bizarre question that is asked hundreds of times before with lost wanderers, whether they came on their own free will or if they were sent. To which Anatoly explains that they were sent when Karen interrupts him and says that they came on their own free will. Anatoly clearly meaning that they had to leave Ukraine and had no other choice. The protagonist in his mind then mentions that it was the wrong answer, seemingly having a twisted moral sense that he's allowed to butcher the guests if it's their own free will. Hence why leaving the cabin can be interpreted as more of an analogy that the guests are freely giving up their own bodies to be butchered and served, rather than literally leaving the cabin and drowning, with their corpses magically showing up at the cabin. The protagonist then mentions to the guests that they are welcome to stay until they are ready to leave, a metaphor to being ready to die. That's why he waited throughout the story for the guests to decide to leave on their own, whether pressured or not directly killing them. And that's why he believed Karen crossed the line when she decided to take the actions into her own hands and kill the guests or the victims directly. The trumpets, on the other hand, are the representation of the other victims of the protagonist, as indicated through some conversations. That trumpets are in the basement. The potato seemingly is a person whom the protagonist killed and stole his knife from, as revealed through a dialogue. There are some discrepancies in regards to dates, however, with a court hearing intended for the protagonist dated in 1700s, a stabbing victim discovered in 1800s, and the Great Famine of Ukraine possibly being in early 1900s, including an ending which indicates the protagonist has been in the cabin for more than 200,000 days, making him more than 500 years old, which all could mean the protagonist is in a way immortal, maybe specifically requiring human flesh to survive, explaining why he'd rather stay in the cabin and eat human flesh. But more on this in the upcoming video. There are a total of 7 endings, seemingly all revealing more information about the plot, which I'm intending to make a separate video for. Make sure to stay tuned for that by hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your host R, and I will see you on the next one.